Welcome back to Aether Hour, everybody. I'm your host, Conrad Franz, joined as always by Dmitry Kalyagan. We have, maybe one of our most important episodes we've ever done for you this week. It's all about, a certain secret plan that some people may have heard murmuring about the echelons of the internet, but we're talking about, something that is not at the forefront necessarily of the coverage of the conflict of the war in Ukraine, but very much in the minds of certain elite characters. We're going to tell you all about the details shortly. Dmitry, how are you doing?
Doing great, Conrad. Just very eager to speak about this, very unique episode. I think it's probably one of the few episodes in the English language available that will cover this particular project, and I guess it's really more or less the futuristic, prophetic in a way, but not really a prophecy relating to us Christians, but it's a prophetic vision for the future of a certain group, and maybe we could even touch upon some of the conspiracies surrounding this particular vision. I think it's a really deep subject. Of course, naturally, it goes back into history, which, we've discussed many times in the past. And perhaps we have mentioned this subject, except here on this unique episode, we're really going to dive really deep and explore it in all of its detail. And, it is a mysterious subject. It's not really, there are no, authentic texts sort of written about it. There are no protocols. There are no textbooks. There are no archival documents as such. So we have to kind of go off of the scarce information we have received from some researchers as well as historians and even people who've converted to Orthodox Christianity.
Yeah, and a few elite statements, people that have, real wealthy people have set up, foundations. They've kind of hinted at a few of these things, but you're right. This is somewhat new territory. Not that it's novel and necessarily of an idea, but it is, it's a plan that would see a certain part of the world, specifically southern Ukraine, turned into something that, it hasn't been for, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years at this point. So with all of that, I think we're going to dive right on in. And of course, we are talking about the new heavenly Jerusalem, which this episode is going to be, very centered on a specific region of the world. Like we said, southern Ukraine, a place that we already talk about on World War Now very frequently, the Black Sea coast of Ukraine, now, Russia mostly. And, this region, we're going to have a map. It's going to be on the thumbnail, and we're probably also just going to have a image. I'll have it in the Substack description, just floating there. So if you want to kind of look along as you're listening, we'll have that. So look at that. But we're explicitly talking about what you could say is kind of the region between, the far southwestern, kind of panhandle jutting out into, the border of Moldova and Romania of Ukraine, well past Odessa, all the way up to Dnipropetrovsk. And as we said, the idea is this is a new heavenly Jerusalem, meaning that this region has, been designated by certain groups of people, by certain elite players, by certain Israeli citizens to be a possible second homeland for the Jewish people. And of course, there are some very large, Jewish populations or former large Jewish population centers within this region. Of course, it's not super far from Israel compared to the rest of the world, but ultimately, this is this is still a place largely populated by Ukrainians and Russians and people that speak, Ukrainian and Russian explicitly. We know that, Odessa and, Kherson, these were some of the most pro-Russian places with the most pro-Russian militants at the beginning of the Maidan before many of them were cleared out. But at the same time, we know that a lot of these places are very Jewish in their heritage as well, especially, due to their adjacency to the Pale of Settlement and, the status of Jews in the Russian Empire.
Yeah, that's right, because ultimately this particular project of this second heartland of sorts, this second Israel, it has arisen through, I guess you could say, historical necessity. And that's essentially one of the main sources for this particular theory actually comes from a very well-known Russian politician who many of you may have, seen probably online, seen clips of him dancing or having fights in the Russian parliament. That's the late Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who passed away, from COVID complications in 2021, I believe, before the SMO. His father, of course, being of a Polish Jewish descent, he had certain connections within the Russian Jewish community. And in 2001, I believe, or 2002, he gave a very explicit interview on Russian television, which was never really banned. It's somehow mysteriously disappeared from YouTube. But in the interview, it was a the interview host, they were called 2 against 1, where two interviewers interview one particular interviewee, and Zhirinovsky gave a very explicit opinion, and at that time he was the head of the Russian right-wing, I guess you can call it Liberal Democratic Party, LDPR, and I mean, to this day, they're the third largest party in the Russian Federation. He was its head, and of course, he gave a very explicit vision. He says, look, what's happening in Ukraine now, after the 1990s, and why do we see all this large Israeli immigration, and essentially the Jewish communities are very, very much thriving in Ukraine. Why do we see all of this? He says, well, it's because they're planning to create a second homeland, just in case the Middle Eastern politics somehow get a little bit too hot and a little bit out of hand, and Israel isn't able to, in fact, defend itself, to the point where all Israelis would need to migrate somewhere to safety. So he was giving this interview while the Iraq War was still ongoing, so this is somewhere close to 9/11. So you can imagine Saddam Hussein is still around, Iraq is still somewhat of a powerful state, and Israel was indeed under threat. But perhaps Zhirinovsky's vision changed later on. In fact, but he never actually gave that opinion away. I think even, if anything, he somewhat spoke about it again after 2014, when he brought up the fact that, look, most of the politicians running Kiev have in many ways dual citizenships, and they have, in some ways prepared this particular area around southern Ukraine, Novorossiya, Malorossiya, these areas, all the way west outwards towards Odessa, as a potential new homeland for, the Israeli citizens in case some tragedy was to happen from the Israeli perspective in the Middle East. Maybe the Palestinians would rise up, maybe Egypt would once again take up arms against Israel, and the Arab world would simply push Israel into the Mediterranean Sea. So as you can imagine, this, for an Israeli mindset, this is a great tragedy, and the plan B would need to be prepared. Now, where would be the most comfortable land for an Israeli population? Where would you find that? I mean, historically, I suppose the closest analogy would be a safe and a relatively lukewarm, Christian, but probably not too Christian due to its Soviet heritage, Ukraine. Perfect. It's a small state, incredibly corrupt, and at that point, ready to be sown and ready to be prepared for something a lot greater from this particular Israeli perspective.
Yeah, when it comes to, again, the idea of Heavenly Jerusalem as a second Israel, and the Zhirinovsky making the statement that they could be, there's a danger for them there, that may be a place to run away. This ultimately comes full circle into 2017, when a lot of this project became more public, with, I think, one of the most key players in this, which is Igor Burkhead, who is a Jewish, Israeli, Ukrainian, Kazakh citizen, who has been a kind of a key player in Ukrainian nationalist politics for a while. He was a soldier in the Soviet Union, apparently was a reconnaissance commander in Afghanistan, and was the previous owner of a bank in Kazakhstan, which he eventually sold off to Russia. And he has been talking about the Heavenly Jerusalem project for a long time now. And in 2017, he's given all sorts of interviews and has talked about how he himself at one point brought 183 Jews from Haifa into Ukraine in January 2017, and they laid the first cornerstone of the foundation of the Heavenly Jerusalem, which he says was laid in the fertile Ukrainian soil. And the preparations are being made for the first 100,000 Jews to be moved from Israel to Ukraine. And then by the end of, the later 2020s, they plan to bring 6 to 12 million from Russia, and USA, and surrounding European countries that have larger Jewish populations. And, he is somebody that led a party in Ukraine at one point called Great Ukraine. It was a smaller political party, but this guy he's made videos, he goes to Israel and gives lectures fear-mongering the people there about the danger that they're in, and how they can't grow food in the desert, and how therefore they need to all migrate to the fertile farmlands of southern Ukraine, which these are, like, almost the majority of this are the regions that Russia has recently incorporated into the Russian Federation explicitly. Kherson region, which is the most, produces some of the most wheat of any region in the entire world, I think, definitely on a per, acre or hectare basis. And, again, this the way this Igor Burkhead guy sounds like a low key, very insane cult leader, but he has millions and millions of dollars, and he has the ear of many figures in Israel and around the world, and he says, he just kind of lays it out that one morning, one shofar will sound in Dnepropetrovsk and the other shofar will sound in Odessa. And then at that moment, when the sounds of the two trumpets merge into one, it will be possible to say that heavenly Jerusalem has come to earth. And, this kind of starts to beg the question of if this is a plan that is in the works with people from Israel. We know that, while Israel definitely leans towards Ukraine in the broader supporting one side or the other in this conflict, Netanyahu and the Likud faction itself is much more interested in remaining neutral because of their close ties with Vladimir Putin. And as of now, it seems that there's a possibility that the plan of, the heavenly Jerusalem and, you could say Greater Israel too. We'll probably touch on Greater Israel in the Middle East itself in a second, but that this Heavenly Jerusalem project is kind of, perhaps forces conspired to lead to this current conflict to take place to, as some might say, clear out, the non-desirable population so that, a Jewish population could come in. I'm wondering your thoughts on that, Dimitri.
Yeah, I think for most people since at least 2014, it became evident after the Maidan had occurred, and of course the junta inside the Ukraine elected its first president, who, as we know, in the Donbass, Pietro Poroshenko wasn't really seen as a ethnic Ukrainian at all in the Donbass. We already spoke about it in previous A4 episodes, but the former head of the Donetsk People's Republic, Alexander Zaharchenko, openly called Pietro Poroshenko Waltzman. So he believed Poroshenko was actually an ethnic.
Thank you for listening to the free preview of this episode of Aether Hour. I'm sure you can see why this one has to be behind the paywall, no YouTube or anything, a very controversial subject. But to listen to the full thing, be sure to go paid on Substack, worldwarnow.substack.com. Links are all in the description below. If you're on Substack, you can just click right there and upgrade with that free trial. You get access to all of our other Aether Hour episodes as well as some of our premium articles. So I promise it's well worth it, and it makes the whole operation here at World War Now possible. So thank you so much for listening, and God bless.